I remember the wind that morning, how it moved through the birch trees as if it knew something we didn't. The sky had no clouds, but it wasn't empty. There was a tension in the air, like a held breath before a scream. Somewhere far above, something had shifted, not the weather, not a season, something deeper. I watched as the sun rose, not from its usual place, but slightly off, like it was uncertain of its role. It cast a different kind of light, sharper, colder, like a spotlight on a stage none of us had prepared for. I saw her standing in that light, her face turned upward, as if waiting for the sky to confess. The earth had slipped, not visibly, not with sound or tremor, but the orbit, the invisible tether that held us in harmony with the sun, had quietly unraveled. We didn't notice at first. We still made coffee. We still checked our messages, but time was drifting sideways. Our calendars began to betray us. The moon set too early. Shadows stretched at odd angles. Somewhere in the silence between days, we had been nudged off course, and now we were falling, not down but outward, toward something ancient. Jupiter. I had always thought of it as a distant painting, a swirl of storms, a gas giant too far to fear. But as it grew larger in the night sky, filling it like a wound, I realized it was not a planet. It was a destination, a presence. The others began to panic. We ran simulations, calculated trajectories, but it was already too late. Our planet had become a stray bullet, and Jupiter was the wall. I kept thinking about her hands, the way she traced constellations on fogged glass, as if trying to map our undoing. And still, the sky didn't sleep. It pulsed with colors I couldn't name, with magnetic flickers that made the hair on my arms rise. Birds flew in wrong directions. Tides staggered, confused by a moon that no longer had anything to orbit around. The Earth was not falling. It was being summoned, pulled, as if Jupiter had opened its eye and chosen us. I remember her breathing against the window. I remember the silence of no sunrise. I remember the first day the stars stopped twinkling, just stared, unblinking like witnesses. We had left the warmth of the sun, and the sky, once so passive, had turned into something alive. Watching, waiting. It began as a dimming, so subtle it felt like a trick of the atmosphere, as if the air had thickened or the sun had grown shy behind some imperceptible veil. The colors dulled first. Greens lost their fire, the sky turned from blue to the color of steel, and the light through the windows took on the tone of late November, even though it was spring. It wasn't immediate. It was betrayal by degrees, like a friend who stops answering your calls slowly enough that you question your own memory of warmth. We passed the orbit of Mars sometime around the 100th day. By then, Jupiter was a colossus in our sky. No longer a speck among constellations, it had taken over the firmament like a god arriving uninvited. Our daylight, half what it used to be, cast long, weary shadows even at noon. The cold followed, not in gusts or blizzards, but in silence. Pipes cracked from within. Breath lingered too long in the air. She wrapped herself in an old red coat that used to smell like campfires, but now only held the scent of dust and insulation. The earth, ever stubborn, clung to its heat a little longer. Our atmosphere, resilient, dense, acted like a fading candle flame. But even that would not last. Without the sun's full embrace, our oceans sighed, beginning to draw back into themselves. The wind changed tone, less playful, more hollow. We started lighting fires not for comfort, but for memory. The flicker of flame in a darkening world became a kind of religion. I remember the stillness of the lakes, how the ice didn't crack, only thickened, opaque and indifferent. No more skipping stones, no ripples, just a glass lid sealing the silence beneath. The trees stopped trying. Leaves curled inward and held their breath. Somewhere in the north, a great aurora unfurled in slow motion, pale and uncertain, as if confused about who it should be dancing for. And she spent her nights on the roof, wrapped in blankets, watching the shifting face of Jupiter. Some said it looked angry, others said it was beautiful. She only whispered one word, listening, as if the planet itself had ears, as if the vastness cared what we feared, what we hoped. Maybe it did. As the atmosphere thinned and frost crept across our walls like ghost veins, we began to understand. This was not just distance from the sun, this was exile, a falling away from everything familiar, and we had no map for the silence. By day 180, Jupiter no longer hovered in our sky, it devoured it. The stars disappeared behind its mass, and what remained above us was a tapestry of shifting storms and silent pressure. It didn't rotate, it churned. You could watch its bands slide across the heavens like breath across a mirror, enormous and endless. No sunrise, no constellation, just Jupiter, moving slowly across the sky like a thought too large to finish. I remember the night I first saw the great red spot through a telescope. It wasn't red, not really. It was the color of bruised coral and ancient wine, spinning with slow violence. A storm twice the size of Earth, raging for centuries without rest. She adjusted the focus with delicate fingers, breath crystallizing near the lens. Her voice barely a whisper. It's not a planet, it's an eye. And in that moment, I saw it too. Not a body, a watcher. We tried to measure the risks. Collisions with its 79 moons, tidal stress, electromagnetic surges, but the numbers collapsed under the weight of scale. The closer we got, the more our instruments lied to us. Or maybe they told the truth, but we lacked the language to hear it. Gravity warped our expectations. Time stretched and yawned. Clocks ticked slower in some regions, faster in others. People reported déjà vu, lost time, looping dreams, and still we moved forward. The pull of Jupiter was irresistible, not just gravitational, but psychological, like a voice in a dark room saying your name with unbearable softness. We knew we were dying, but we also knew we were about to witness something few civilizations had, the intimacy of planetary death. She stopped wearing gloves. She said she wanted to feel everything now, even the cold, especially the cold. The clouds above us, once innocent and slow, now twisted with strange magnetism. Electrical storms laced the skies, sometimes in total silence. Great flashes that illuminated whole cities like memories surfacing. Sometimes the static was so thick, it raised goosebumps before sound followed. Animals stopped making noise. They watched the sky as if waiting for a command. In the distance, a mountain range vanished beneath a slow-moving curtain of auroras. It didn't feel like science anymore. It felt like theater. Like something enormous had waited eons for this moment, and we were the audience and the sacrifice all at once. I saw her silhouette in the glow, motionless, as if she too had turned to face something only she could see. Jupiter had not risen. We had descended into its reach, and it did not blink. The moment of entry was not marked by impact, but by light. Light so sudden and absolute it erased every shadow we had ever known. It came not from outside, but from within our own sky, as if the atmosphere itself had caught fire. And in a way, it had. As Earth's crust broke the outer layers of Jupiter's atmosphere, the pressure crushed us like the shell of a moth between fingers. The air thickened into flame. Oceans turned to steam in seconds. Mountains bowed to heat. And yet, for one fleeting instant, the world glowed. I remember the sound. It wasn't thunder, not exactly. It was a low, endless vibration, like the groan of something ancient waking from beneath the surface of time. Windows burst inward not from shock waves, but from confusion. The laws of sound and silence didn't know how to behave anymore. Metal warped in place. Trees ignited from the inside out. It was beautiful, in a terrible, incomprehensible way. She stood in the doorway of what used to be a greenhouse, her hair moving in waves from a heat with no wind. Petals blackened mid-bloom. The glass above her shimmered, then cracked like a spider's web. I wanted to tell her to run, but there was nowhere left to go. She raised her hand, not in panic, but in awe. That gesture, slow, deliberate, reminded me that we were not just dying, we were witnessing the sublime. Inside Jupiter's atmosphere, gases moved like thought. Ammonia, hydrogen, methane, all dancing in convective spirals we could barely comprehend. As Earth descended, we passed through layers of this strange sky, each more hostile than the last. Temperatures rose past steel's melting point, and yet, before the crust disintegrated, before our cities were lost to pressure and flame, I swear I felt something, like resistance. As if Jupiter itself paused, took notice, held its breath. Somewhere in the chaos, I saw her face again, not in person, but in the reflection of a broken screen. Her expression was not fear, it was wonder. And that undid me more than anything else. To look into destruction and find beauty is not ignorance. It is the last act of a conscious species. The Earth, our ship, our story, had become an ember, and Jupiter, vast and unknowable, had caught it in its open palm. The fire was not an end. It was the soft flicker of memory preparing to scatter into something larger, something without name. There was no final crash, no epic shattering of continents, no last scream, just a quiet unmaking. Earth did not collide with Jupiter's core because there was none to find. The gas giant is a gradient, not a destination. As we descended deeper, pressure turned matter to haze, then to dust, then to silence. The planet that carried every story we'd ever told dissolved like breath on a mirror. First went the mountains, folded like paper under invisible hands. Then the oceans, ripped into vapor, their tides pulled apart molecule by molecule, scattered through foreign winds. The cities vanished without fire. Steel twisted briefly, then surrendered. Language, culture, all our archives and ambitions, unwritten by turbulence. We thought the end would be violent, but it was intimate. As if Jupiter didn't destroy us out of rage, but absorbed us out of melancholy. She left her coat on a rusted railing near the observation dome. I found it days before the data feeds went dark. It smelled faintly of pine and something older, something like the air before rain. Inside the coat pocket was a folded paper star, creased and worn at the edges. No message, just the silent geometry of memory. I never saw her again. In the upper layers of Jupiter's clouds, our remnants began to spiral, not as wreckage, but as shimmer. Debris became dust, dust became particulate heat, heat became signal. Earth was no longer a body. It was a pattern, an afterimage curling into the endless orchestra of gases. Somewhere within those pale, violent clouds, we became part of a new weather system. The universe didn't pause. Stars continued their nuclear songs. Black holes whispered in gravity. Comets carved frozen signatures through the dark. But in the belt of metallic hydrogen, where sound is pressure and color has weight, there was a brief change, a flicker. A swirl of heavy elements sinking where they should not be. The mark of our passage, like a fingerprint pressed into water. Jupiter did not mourn us, but it bore the imprint, the way a violin holds the echo of every note it has ever played. And somewhere deep inside the layers where light no longer escapes, a warmth remained, faint, persistent, as if some fragment of us refused to dissolve, as if memory itself had mass. That is how we ended, not with ruin, but with diffusion. And maybe that is how all stories end. Not by being broken, but by being remembered differently, by something larger than themselves. There are places where silence grows thick, where no sound escapes, and yet everything echoes. Somewhere inside Jupiter's slow-breathing mass, among layers of liquid metallic hydrogen and magnetic storms large enough to swallow Earth twice over, there is now a drift, an imperfection in the symmetry, a place where the turbulence stutters. That's where we are, not in form, not in flesh, but as trace, as temperature, as distortion, as the lingering echo of a planet that once looked up and asked questions. I like to think she's still watching, not with eyes, not from a rooftop, but as a shape in the vapor, a pressure pattern that still curves the winds around it differently. Maybe that's what becomes of us, not souls, not data, but gravity. Influence. The way the memory of her breath once fogged the glass still shapes how I look at frost. The way her silhouette, framed in the last light of Earth, still follows me into every dream. From afar, Jupiter looks unchanged, still massive, still swirling. But if you knew where to look, if you knew what used to be, you might catch it. A subtle swirl of heavier elements, a blush of carbon that wasn't there before, a strange local rhythm in the cloud tops like the echo of a vanished heartbeat. We didn't leave monuments, but we left motion. And in motion, a kind of permanence. What strikes me most, in the silence that follows, is how much of us was made for light. Our bodies depended on warmth. Our plants reached for photons. Our cultures gathered around fire and later screens. But in the end, we gave ourselves to darkness. And somehow that too was beautiful. Not tragic, just different. A kind of blooming into obscurity, a letting go. Perhaps across the cosmos, other worlds will someday notice the anomaly. Perhaps a distant civilization watching Jupiter through telescopes of ice and magnetism will see the turbulence and wonder. What passed through here? Who were they? What did they hope for? They won't find cities or signals, but maybe they'll feel it. The faint resistance in the clouds, the softness in the pull, the warmth beneath the storm. And maybe that will be enough, because we were once here. And what if memory, like gravity, never truly fades? What if the universe remembers us long after we forget ourselves? What if, somewhere, someone is still listening?